I have this body of work. It's publishable. It's beautiful. Take it and make it into something. So we won't do that to him, right? So what else do we need to know about you, Kevin, before you start?
Well, like I said, I started the press in 2005. We're coming up on our 15th anniversary in October. I had no idea I would be doing this for as long as I am. Yeah. 50 books or something, or 20, I don't know. And I would have to move on to something else, but it took on a life of its own. And just maybe a year in, I was indebted to so many people I couldn't walk away from it. So everybody, a lot of people are counting on me to show up every day, and our editors to show up every day. We've got Tom Lombardo is our poetry series editor in Atlanta. He published Malika's book.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you.
And I'm trying to think of the title. Isn't that weird? You know,
What the Trapeze Artist Trust, but that's, you know.
What the Trapeze Artist Trust.
When you have so many.
I forget my wife's name sometimes. It's embarrassing. The older you get, the way your mind just doesn't want to work.
I have two kids get their names right.
But Tom brings 2 or 3 collections to us. He is the only reader for our Press 53 Award for Poetry, which will be opening. It's a manuscript competition. That will be opening on April 1st. And we published that winner along with Tom or Chris, our poetry editor here in Winston. He found a book this year from that competition because he helps Tom read. They both read the submissions or manuscripts as they come in and they discuss them. But Tom reads all of them, everything that comes in, and makes a decision. Chris has just started a new poetry series with us called the Immersion Poetry Series, which I'm really excited about. This is our most recent one. It's Hope of Stones. Backwards, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lovely.
Isn't that
perfect for us? It's perfect for us. We see it
Backwards
exactly.
for you, but perfect for us.
put it like that?
Wow.
Yeah, that doesn't work either. Okay, there you go. Anyway, the idea behind that series is Chris had edited a book for us by Sean Sexton, our cowboy poet, who May Darkness Restore is the title of that. And it came out last year. He's a cattle rancher in Vero Beach, Florida. He's got a 600-acre cattle ranch, and he writes poetry about this lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And the collection was just so impressive that the world he takes you into, the love he has for these animals, so Chris got the idea, wouldn't it be nice to do a series where we take people into places and lifestyles and things like that? So he put a call out, and the very first book we did came out in January. It was called Revelation, an Apocalypse in 58 Fights. And when he told me what it was about, I shook my head and thought, you got to be kidding. You're not. It's about the 58 professional fights of Mike Tyson.
Wow, love it.
And I tell you what, every poem, there are 58 poems. Each is a 100-word prose poem in language that is just gorgeous. And each poem is about each one of his 58 fights. So he takes you from this young Mike Tyson who rises to be the greatest boxer in the world, and then follows his descent down to where his very last fight, his 58th fight, he doesn't answer the bell and sits on his stool in the corner and just quits. And they compare it to the biblical Elijah climbing the mountain and coming back down. And it's really amazing. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous prose poetry. And then he found his second one is called Drowning in the Floating World by Meg Eden, who lives up in the Baltimore area. And it's about the 3/11, March 11 tsunami that hit Japan and destroyed the nuclear power plant and just the devastation. She's not Japanese, but her father has worked there for more than half of her life. So she spent a lot of time in Japan, and that collection's getting great reviews for us. It's really a beautiful collection as well. So that's the work Chris is doing. This new one, Hope of Stones, is interesting. He found this one. It's written in 3 parts. There are, let me find a page here so I can show you. This is all backwards, I apologize, but okay, here we go.
It's not backwards for us.
The poem over here, where it's set in the middle, is the voice of the poet. And this one over here, that's set flush right, is in the voice of a nun, a Spanish nun. And the other poems that are set flush left are in the voice of a French architect who built the underground, the underground that's under Paris. And it's a dialogue between all 3 of them, and it really is fascinating. So that's kind of the work we're doing with poetry. So we've got Tom Lombardo, we've got Chris Forrest, he's in my office here. We've got Pamela Ushik and William Pitt Root in the South, bring us an eclectic mix of poets for their series, the Silver Concho series. So we're doing a lot of things in poetry. We do about 12 poetry collections a year now. So it's a real team effort. We also do about four short fiction collections a year, which I handle myself, on top of running the business, which is never ending. I spend probably 2 hours every day just answering emails. And I wish I had somebody who could do that, but I've got to do it. Plus the bookkeeping and all that other stuff. So, but we don't, we got to the point where we don't have an open submission period. What I found was it's much like being a woman on the prairie back in the 1800s, where all you're doing all day is cooking and cleaning and mending and cooking and cleaning and mending and cooking. You know, it's never ending. You know, the men would go out and raise a barn and they would celebrate and break out the, the whiskey or whatever. And the women were just in this cycle. Cooking, cleaning, mending, cooking, cleaning, mending. And that's the way it is with open submissions. You just never get through everything. You're constantly facing this barrage of submissions. So we decided a few years ago to start our annual manuscript competition. So number one, we could sign a book with a nice cash award for it. And also we have a 4-month period for submissions and another 3 months to get through all those to announce the winner, which gives us about 5 months of not having submissions coming in and dominating our day. So we can actually tie it all up and we can send notes to everybody and say, here's the winner we've selected, here are the finalists, thank you very much. And we really do appreciate everyone sending their work in. It's a challenge to read through all these manuscripts and find the winner. I'm reading right now for the Press 53 Award for Short Fiction. We had 240 entries come in this year, and I read all of them myself. So besides going to the office and working from 9 to 5 or 6 or whatever, I come home and read because I can't read at the office. There are too many distractions. So I've got to work through all these manuscripts. And for those who enter contests, let me give you an idea how this works, because I've talked to a lot of different publishers who have contests, and this is basically how it works. For the poetry contest, for example, for Tom Lombardo, he will read the first 10 poems of every manuscript that comes in. And he'll make a decision after 10 poems if he wants to keep reading or not. So your first 10 poems have to be really strong. You can't start out weak and think that someone's going to hang with you. You know, I had a lady who I know locally, and she sent me a manuscript. She wanted to know if I'd take a look at it as a poetry manuscript. So I took some time and read it and met with her. And I said, you know, this first section of poems you got in this are killing the whole thing, because they read like, and I asked her to forgive me. I said, but they read like someone who just started writing. And they're all about emotions. They're all about how you feel. They're all about, you know, these wide, huge, sweeping kind of things like, you know, standing on a cliff, staring out into the darkness and all that. And you can't sense where you are and what's going on. And she said, well, it's interesting because those were the first poems I ever wrote. And I said, why did you put them up front? Because you gave me the impression that if I was reading for a contest or looking at a manuscript, after I got through like 10 of these, I would say, I'm not interested in this. She said, well, did you get deeper into it? The poems deeper are much better. And I said, well, that doesn't work. You can't expect your reader to hang with you, and you can't expect an editor. Nobody's going to wait for you to deliver the good stuff. They want it right away. We want the top of our head to blow off on the first poem, and then you got to maintain that. That's the challenge. So when I'm reading for the short fiction competition, for example, I will read the first story or first or second story. It depends on the collection. Like if the first story is 10 pages, I'll probably read the second story as well, and then decide if I'm going to read more. If the first story is 35 pages and it just doesn't work, I'm not going to keep reading. I'm going to give it a thumbs down and move on. Because out of the 240, I've got a bunch of other manuscripts in there, and I know I'm going to find one that I'm going to get all the way through, and I'm going to love every story in it. And that's what I'm looking for. So that's where I am right now. We had 240 entries. Of those 240, 40 of them had a thumbs up. And that's when I start my deep read, where I go back in and I start reading until I don't want to read anymore, where I'm just kind of, it's not holding my attention. It's not maintaining that strength that the first story had. So it's a huge undertaking, but it's very rewarding because I get to call someone and say, congratulations, you just won this contest and we're going to publish your book. And that's always fun. It's always great to deliver that. And I usually find another collection or two. One year, I actually published the winner in 4 other collections from the contest. That was a particularly good year, very strong year. So anyway, that's my advice for contests and everything. But besides that, you know, we do regular, we've got poets and short fiction writers we've published in the past, and we always want to publish their next book. We want to keep working with them and helping them build a career. If it's a short fiction writer, my hope is that if they're working on a novel, which most of them are, that they will find a publisher for the novel that's one of the big publishers or an offshoot of that big publisher. Small presses have a limited reach. There are a lot of bookstores out there who just will not carry a small press title. Even the independent bookstores, which surprises me. But a lot of bookstores just don't want to deal with small press titles for some reason. It's just easier to order through Ingram from the big 6 and put them out on the table and sell them and make sure the table's stocked up. They don't want to work. Now, we're fortunate. We've got a lot of really good independent bookstores in North Carolina that do carry our books. There are a few have excellent poetry sections that are well cultivated. They work those, they make sure they're up to date, and they have, you know, if you go to Quail Ridge Books, Scuppernong Books, Bookmarks here in Winston, Malaprops, Park Road Books, or City Lights books, just to name a few, own the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines. You go to those bookstores and you're going to find a really nice poetry section. You can spend a day there browsing and finding new poets, not just the usual suspects. That the other store, you go to a Barnes & Noble, most of the Barnes & Nobles have the usual suspects. You'll find Maxine Kumin, you'll find Billy Collins, you'll find Shakespeare, you'll find, you know, just name off the who's who of the history of poetry, and that's who you'll find. But you may not find the poet down the road who's doing amazing things. So that's what we look for. We look for finding these bookstores that will work with us as a partner to make sure our books are there, and we will help them cultivate their poetry section. I'm trying to get them to have a short fiction section.
That'd be great.
Or take the short fiction and put it right in with the general fiction, and you can't find the short fiction if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And getting them to budge on that has been really difficult. Scuppernong Books in Greensboro has a short fiction section, which is great. And the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines has a short fiction section. And they did that without me even, you know, requesting they do that. They were doing that anyway. So that was fantastic. So it's a struggle. You know, when you're with a small press, it's important that you have authors who are publishing widely,
and active,
audience beyond their friends and family. You want to have, when you sign a poet, you don't want to just sell regionally, but you want to sell nationwide, because they're out there publishing in magazines and journals, and they're building friendships and a support team of other writers around the country, around the world, really. So that's the mission here, is we're out looking for these unique voices. And we can only do so many. I mean, 12 books a year is not much when you think about the number of poets there are out there. So we have to be highly selective on what we do.
Thank you so much, Kevin. This is a great overview. I do see some questions that are coming up. Would you like to have them now?
Yes, let's get
Awesome. So John was asking, how many poetry entries are usually chosen from the competition? Typically chosen.
We'll publish the winner, of course, and then we'll probably find 3 other ones that we want to do. So it's not bad. It's about, you know, it's probably about 1% of what comes in we end up publishing.
Yeah, 1%, which is, you know, that it's still a lot.
So we get 400 submissions for poetry, and we're publishing 4.
Yeah.
So it's really tough.
Yeah.
You got to have your best work in there.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, for short fiction, it's probably about 1% as well.
Okay.
We'll do 2 to 3
ratio.
total. Yeah.
From Claire, she's asking, how important is it these days for a book of poetry to have a unified theme or story arc? Is a unified voice enough, is what Claire is asking.
I think it depends on the collection. I wouldn't think about themes, or let the collection tell you what it should be. We've published collections that don't have necessarily a theme. We're just looking for great poetry that takes us a lot of different places. But there are collections we do that have that theme. It holds up real well. Or there might be sections where, you know, like Val Neiman's Wake, Wake, Wake.
Yeah.
It's in 3 sections, and each section is a different form of waking.
Yeah.
It's really kind of neat. So it's, I think, there's no formula. It really depends on the collection. You know, Joseph Bethanti once told me that he doesn't think about, when he's writing his poetry, he doesn't think about themes or books or how it's going to be. He just keeps writing what he wants to write at the time. And eventually, he'll look at his body of work and say, oh, I think I've got a book here. And he'll pull out the poems that fit that book. You know, so it's, everyone approaches it differently. But as an editor, we're just looking for something that's going to surprise us. You know, we're not looking for anything in particular, really.
Okay.
At least we aren't.
That's very helpful, because I think a lot of times people think you have to have that, but what you're really saying is excellence of the poems is the primary driving thing.
Yeah.
He also asked, are there certain North Carolina small presses and lit magazines that you personally read or that you enjoy?
Boy, that's tough. I don't read as much as I used to outside of manuscripts, because it's like that's all I do. Is I've always got a stack of manuscripts to go through. And, you know, we've published probably close to 130 different writers in 15 years. And many of those have, I want to see their next collection. So right now, for example, I've got 5 short story manuscripts besides what I'm reading now, which is this big stack of people I've published in the past who say, I've got another collection. And then you've got to look at it. And I've done this before and I hate to do it, but I'll tell an author, you know, I would love to see your next collection, but we need to do something with your first one. You're not selling it, you know, and selling it is not so much about the money. It's about readership. The money's important because that's what keeps our doors open. We're not a nonprofit press, and the reason I didn't do that was because I didn't want to have a board to answer to. I didn't want to have a board who might step up and say, I don't like the direction you're going. I don't, you know, we don't feel comfortable about publishing this book if it's something I truly believed in. So we're really an editor-run press. I tell each of my editors, don't think about what I'm looking for. Don't think about what our readers might want. Publish work that you love. And then we're going to go out and find people who agree with us. So what book sales tell me, the book sales tell me that we're doing it right, that we're reaching those readers who love what we're doing. And if we do that, they'll come back and support other poets and writers. So if we publish someone whose book we're going to take on, we publish it, it's really nice to see orders coming in from people they don't even know. But people I know have ordered from us before because they want to see what else we're doing.
Right.
Readership grows, you know, so it's part of what we're doing, it's part of what the author is doing. So it is important to think about book sales. And I've told authors in the past that, you know, your sales don't warrant a second book, I'm sorry to say. You need to get out and work your book a little more. You know, find more readers for your second book by getting your first one out there. You spend years writing this first book, and then you give it 6 months and you're done with it. That doesn't make sense. You know, great writing has no expiration date. So just get out, share it with people, and find readers, find new readers, find people who are going to jump on your team, your support group.
With another question, okay, I found Bill's question. Do the academic presses have a substantially different selection process than yours?
Probably. I don't know. I would think they do. I think when you're talking about an academic press, there's probably a board involved. I would doubt that there's one person making all the decisions.
Yeah.
I know at the big publishers in New York, for example, the editor can love a manuscript, but in some of those cases, they have to find at least 1 or 2 other editors in-house who agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the publisher says, okay, let's take it to the marketing board, the marketing board can kill it outright. Say, no, we don't see a market for this. We don't see where this is relevant. And they can kill it. So small presses, it's typically down to one person. But But with an academic press where you may have
A lot more.
a few people in the English department or creative writing department, and they're all getting together discussing this, and even they only can do so many books a year. So they're very selective. So sometimes you have to get past this gauntlet of editors to agree to be published.
You're getting tons of questions in here, so since you're answering them. So the next one is, would you consider a flash fiction collection?
Yes, we've published several.
I was gonna say, I thought you, yeah.
We've published several. We love flash fiction.
Awesome.
And also prose poetry. We love prose
So I was
poetry.
gonna say prose poetry, because I know at one point that was something that y'all were actively seeking.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Lombardo especially was out looking for, and we, one of the first collections we did, it might have been the first collection of prose poetry, was by Shivani Mehta,
Yeah.
who lives in Los Angeles, California. And she's a student of Richard Garcia
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
in the Antioch Writers Program, MFA program. And we read a poem of hers from Narrative Magazine. I get their emails. And
Yeah.
so the contests that are out there, and she took third place in the Narrative Magazine Poetry Contest. And I loved her poem. And so I sent it to Tom, and I said, hey, check out this prose poet.
Yeah.
He read it and said, man, this is fantastic. That's what I've been looking for. I said, well, reach out to her and see if she's got a collection. And so he found her email address and dropped her a note, and come to find out she didn't have a collection. So they spent the next year and a half of her sending him 10 poems at a time, and they would edit them back and forth until they had a collection together.
That's awesome.
He ended up publishing Useful Information for the Soon-to-Be Beheaded.
Yeah.
Gorgeous collection of prose poets. She's one of the top prose poets in the world, I think. She's just amazing.
Yeah.
And it all started because she was in a class with Richard Garcia, and she just asked him, what is a prose poem?
That's awesome.
And he gave her this 15-minute description of what a prose poem is, and she started writing them and fell in love with it.
That's awesome.
Those collections, we love them.
Fantastic. The next one, Bill was asking, if a collection is in sections which are thematically or structurally different, will you read the first few poems of each section? I think that's where, or just the first few poems of the actual book?
Well, the first few poems of the actual book will tell us if the poet knows what he or she is doing. And I can tell you this, that the winner of this year's award for poetry, Moja Koff, My Lover Feeds Me Grapefruit. She's a Middle Eastern poet who teaches at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. Mm-hmm. And she had a poem that went viral about 7 years ago. 7 or 8 years ago. It was called My Grandmother Washes Her Feet in the Sink at, I think it was Sears and Roebuck or something like that. I've been Kmart, I don't know. And I remember reading that poem online, and it went viral. And I even looked her up and to see who she was, what she was doing, and then kind of forgot about it. I think I shared the poem with Tom as well. And so Tom was reading her collection, and this would be her, I think, her third or fourth collection. She's published before. And he called me and he said, I've got this collection. It's 100 and some odd pages. It came in under the 120 pages. I think
Wow.
It's 15 pages. He said, but there's one section in here that's about 60 pages that is just knocking me out. Mm-hmm. And could we just publish that one section? And I said, I'm fine with that if the poet is.
If she will, yeah.
Right. So we had to do this little dance where I called her and I said, look, I just got a question from the judge, and he's wanting to know if you would be willing to just publish a section of your collection.
Yeah.
She immediately said yes.
Yay.
And I said, okay, well, I'll be back with you when he's made his decision. So I didn't tell Tom who it was, didn't tell him anything about her or anything like that. I just waited until he had made his decision. And then we got a hold of Moshe and said, Tom selected your collection. So yeah, it does matter. We do that. Something we don't like, and you might want to think about this, is we get collections sometimes where it's in sections, which we don't mind, but one section is an entire chapbook that was published earlier, and we don't like that.
Yeah.
We want
not fresh material.
Yeah. If it's going to be if you're going to pull poems from a chapbook, pull maybe 25, 30% of those poems at the most. But don't just drop a chapbook in there. We actually got one collection, and it was 4 chapbooks, and it was all 4 sections. It was a complete chapbook.
Oh, wow.
We just weren't, we loved the poems, but we didn't want to.
Didn't work. Now, next question that is being asked is, can you give a breakdown on the cost of being a publisher? How much does one collection, fiction or poetry, estimate cost?
Wow.
And we're not talking about the emotional toil.
I think if I broke it down, I'd probably get depressed.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that I make way less than minimum wage.
Wow.
Just because of the time that we put in. Putting having a book printed and doing the layout, design work and all that, besides buying the equipment and having the software and, paying office, we've moved the office out of my home because we had to. We just outgrew it. So I have an office on Trade Street in Winston-Salem, and I have to pay rent every month. And we do have some part-timers once in a while we pay. But a lot of the work that we put in is sweat equity. We're just hoping that in the end, we'll have enough money to pay rent and hopefully pay ourselves something. Tom earns, for example, a certain percentage of every book that's sold from his selections. And Chris has been with me 2 years. He's there part-time 3 days a week. He was a student at Kathy Smith Bowers at Queen's University, Charlotte. His background's interesting. He got a degree in finance at Chapel Hill, married a young woman, and he got a job in finance after he graduated and worked there for 10 years, putting his wife through medical school. And then when she went into a practice as a pediatrician and they had a little boy, she said, why don't you stay home and take care of our son and I go to work. And then he went to Queen's University's low res program and got his MFA in poetry with Kathy Smith Bowers. And he's brilliant. And he said, I want to volunteer. You don't have to pay me anything, but I just want to learn the business.
Yeah.
I want to edit. I want to learn the business, how to run a press, and see if it's something I want to do. So here we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary, and he's going to be coming on board at some point as a partner. He's enjoying it, loves what he does.
That's awesome.
When he was working with Tom reading for the manuscript competition, Tom called me after 2 weeks and said, I don't know where you found this guy. He's really good, and you need to keep him. And he said, I'm learning things that he's pointing out things to me that I missed. So, which can happen. Every editor has his or her own tastes in what they read. And so Chris was bringing these questions up about things that Tom overlooked because he just kind of missed it. So anyway, the overall running the press, putting a price tag on it is really difficult. But I would say that if you took our time and everything else just to bring a book to press probably cost us in the neighborhood of a couple $1,000s. As we do, if we have to get cover art, we pay the artist for that. So there are expenses, to go with. And but it's probably about that. So we're hoping, what we're doing is we're investing hoping that it will pay dividends later, that we'll be able to pull somebody out to pay bills or to whatever,
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, there's a whole row of questions. So the next one is, once a manuscript is accepted for publication, how involved is a poetry editor in the process of refining it and bringing it to publication?
Very. I've kind of stepped aside from poetry because I'm a short fiction writer who loves poetry, and I really feel like that there's only so much I can do with a poetry collection. My wheelhouse is short fiction. So I'll hand a poetry manuscript off to Chris when I get one in from whoever and say, would you read this, look it over, and offer any thoughts. So that's good. But I know Tom Lombardo, for example, and I will say this right away, that both Chris and Tom and Pam and Bill, we all have the same ideas on what an editor should be. And the number one thing that we all agree on is that an editor should be invisible. We're not going to take a manuscript and insert our voice, insert our ideas, our fingerprints all over it. What we're going to do is just question the poet or the writer about, what do you mean by this? And let's talk about this over here. And Tom will have, for example, he'll have a 2 or 3 hour phone conversation with someone. You might remember that, Malika, what it was like working with Tom.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He was fantastic. I loved the experience.
Yeah, and he really does challenge you. I mean, that's his job. An editor's job is to challenge you to make this thought more clear, or find a better metaphor for this, or let's kill this cliche. You don't want that. And that happens sometimes. You'll find some, no, it's a cliche, but it will be. And the cliches are basically anything you've ever heard or said in your life. You want to be fresh and new with whatever it is you're doing. So we're always looking for that. And Chris is the same way. I mean, I'll be in the office and Chris will be on a phone call with a poet on a manuscript and talking nuts and bolts of poetry, and the compliments we get from people who have been, Jim Peterson, for example, who's been publishing for probably 35 years or so, and he taught the MFA program at up in Virginia. Now think of the name. It's right on the tip of my brain. Anyway, this guy's been around. He's a magnificent, really wonderful writer and teacher. And when he got done working with Chris, he called me and said, "I've never worked with an editor who's so thorough." And man, it just makes me proud. It makes me real happy when I hear that.
Yeah, it is amazing what a big difference that can make.
Yep.
What would be the top 3 strategies for promoting a new book of poems to increase an author's, I think it says, to increase an audience? So what would be your top 3 strategies that you might recommend to an author?
The first thing a poet has to do is they have to publish widely in magazines and journals. You have to do that. That's before a book is even thought of. It's not about the book, really. If you think about it, it's not about the book. The book comes later. It's got to be about each individual poem. There's a poem by Adrian Rice that I just love called Advice to a Young Poet, and I've read this to my kids who aren't interested in writing. They have other aspirations and all this, but it applies to anything you do in your life. It's a very short poem. If you've any ambition, lose it early. For what's ambition worth if you're here to tell the truth? And I tell them that if, young poets, if I have my door's always open, and I have a lot of young writers and even older writers who are just starting out come to my office, and they have a book and they want to publish a book, and I start asking them, well, what's your experience in publishing your individual pieces? And they'll say, I've never done that. I have a book. And I'll tell them, well, it's really not about the book, because right now the only readers you have are friends and family. who will buy your book because they're obligated to buy it. You know, they may not even like what you're doing, but they'll buy it because you're family and friend. So what you have to do is get out and find your audience. And the only way to do that is to either go out to writers' nights, which is one way you can do it. But the wider audience is the magazines and journals. Get some experience working with editors and publishers on that scale. That is a platform you cannot ignore. If you're sitting down at the desk with that laptop in front of you, the blank screen, the blank piece of paper, whatever it is, and your mind is off over here somewhere thinking about this book, right? Your mind's not where it's supposed to be. Your focus isn't where it's supposed to be. So you have to be true to the page. You put the truth down on the page and make it the best thing you possibly can. And then you have to let it go and send it out and find a home for it. And you have to do that about 100, 120 times. And then once you do that, you might have a book there. And you might have, another 1,000, 2,000 people who know who you are and can't wait for your book to come out. That's your team.
You actually started answering the question that comes next about, the percentage of poems in a book that should already be published, which is essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's something, when I look at a short fiction collection, which usually, say if it has 15 stories, I would like to see at least 10 of those stories previously published somewhere. When I'm reading for the contest, it doesn't matter because I'm just looking for the best collection. But if someone sends me a collection or I request one from someone, say I read an article or a story that I really loved and invite them to send, if they've published 1 or 2 stories, then they have no audience yet. They really don't have that audience they need, that support group they need to support a book. So I encourage them, get out and get your stories out there. Build some readership, build that support team of editors who will review your book, talk about your book, recommend your book. And but until you do that, you're putting the cart before the horse, to use a cliche. So in the collection, what that tells me when I see like a poetry collection that's got 60 poems in it and 20 to 25 have been published somewhere, that doesn't tell us that the poet can write and that people like their work. It tells us that they're working, that they're out there building a support team. They're actually doing something besides sitting home and writing. We published one book years ago, a wonderful, beautiful collection of poems. And this is the other thing, the poet was widely published, but this poet would not get out and give readings. Get out and introduce her book. And if she did go out, she wouldn't take the book with her and wouldn't get it in people's hands. When you go out and give a reading and people love you, they want to take you home with them. And the only way they can do that is that if they buy your book. And if they buy your book, you just picked up a reader. A book sale equals a reader. So that's what you're looking for, are readers. Because if someone loves your work, they're going to tell other people, and they're going to tell other people, and other people, and that's how you build a following. And that's how you draw the attention of maybe, a larger publisher.
So here's a question. Has your 53-word contest ever led to publications of a volume by an author?
Not yet. But
Okay.
we have had people enter the contest who published elsewhere. But I'll tell you what it did lead to. We've got a young woman named Flora Thomas who won our January contest in 2017, I believe it was. And she contacted me months later. She was a student at Anderson University in South Carolina, getting her English degree. And she contacted me about doing an internship. And she said, I'm from the Winston-Salem area. My mom lives in King, which is just north of here. And I'll be home for the summer, and I'd love to intern with you. And so I told her, I said, well, if you're home for the holidays, Christmas, stop by and say hello so we can chat. And so we did. She stopped by, and we had a really nice conversation. I gave her some books. She was going to be home for about 3 or 4 weeks. So I gave her some books. I said, take these home and read them, then come back in a week or two and let's talk some more. And her insights into what she read, very impressive. The way she articulated her ideas and pointed things out that proved to me that she understood the subtlety of great writing. And so I invited her to do the summer internship. So she spent the summer with us and did such a good job. I said, look, when you graduate in December, during that time off before grad school from January through August, why don't you come back and I'll pay you to work here part-time. That's all I can afford right now, but I'll pay you to work here. So she did. She came back and last year worked January 15 through August 15 for us and did such a great job. This was a woman who I could hand a manuscript off to, knowing that I would get it back edited, really edited. And I knew that because when she first came on, we would sit down and read the same manuscript and edit the same manuscript. And we would, about 80% of what we found, we both found. And then about 10% was things she found that I missed. And then I would find a few things that she would miss. And we would have these discussions and talk about grammar and punctuation and story and plot and all this stuff. So when she went back to grad school, I mentioned to Chris, I said, we've got 2 years to figure out how to bring her on full time. So it could lead to other things.
Right.
Well, I was going to mention.
NC State now on a full ride.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that a lot of times people don't understand that behind the scenes, there's a lot of mentoring and really good work going on. Like Sarah Younger, who now works in New York City,
Right.
You were her first, place to learn.
Right. Yeah, she did really well. She went off to the Denver Institute of Publishing, and I wrote her a letter of recommendation, of course, all that, and they accepted her. And then she went immediately from there to New York, interviewed with an agent that she'd met in Denver at the Denver Publishing Institute, and they hired her. So she never came back. I never saw her again.
Well, that sounds like a book for you, The Adventures in Publishing.
The adventures you put other people on.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get someone to write that for me.
Okay, there's a ton more questions. So ideal number of pages for a chapbook versus or full book.
And again?
What is the ideal number of pages for a chapbook and a book?
I consider a chapbook anything up to about 40 to 45 pages. Every publisher's got their own deal with this. We usually try to have, the front and back matter are going to add 12 to 16 pages to any book you do.
Yeah.
We're looking for about 60 poems for a full collection of poetry, 60 to 70, could be 80. It depends on the collection. But, 60 to 80 is probably good for a full length. Chapbook could be anywhere from 25 to 45, maybe, something like that.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then Bill Griffin says, in the galaxy of journals and magazines, is there a M-class planet for every species of poems seeking a home?
Wow, I'm not sure if I understood that question. Try it again.
In the galaxy of journals and magazines, is there an M-class planet for every species of poem seeking a home?
Wow, I don't know. That's a big question.
Maybe I should unmute Bill and have him, I'm going to unmute him. Hey,
There you
Bill,
go.
help us out here.
Do that.
Unpack that question.
Yeah, unpack that question. We're asking to start a video with you.
Well, so I guess what I'm asking is, how long do you collect rejection slips for a certain poem before you give up looking for an M-class planet where it can survive?
Oh, I see. I don't know. It's kind of, someone once asked Fred Chappell, when do you know a poem is done?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
You told me this. When you're dead.
Right? Yeah, when you're dead.
Right.
I just recently, I was with Joseph Mills. We were at the Sawtooth Center here in Winston-Salem, and they had done a broadside of one of his poems. So he came and read some poems, and then they were going to finish the broadside by letting him run the printing press, manual printing press, to put the type down on this really great broadside with the artwork on it. It's just beautiful. And she said, we get in here, we're typesetting. It took us, just for this little poem, it took us about 5 hours to typeset it. And when we bring people in, sometimes they're editing as they're laying the type. And I said, well, that's the world of a poet. A poet's never done. They're constantly, I think that word's better. I would, if I could, when we did Joseph Mills's collection, Angels, Thieves, and Winemakers, his collection of wine poems, I mentioned to him over lunch one day, so he lives here in Winston. I said, I would love to get my hands on that book again because I could do such a better job with the layout and design of it. And he said, I think I could too. There are a few poems I would pull, some that I've edited since then, and some new poems that I would like to do. So we decided to do a second edition of that book, and about 25% of the poems in there are brand new. And he pulled some poems that he wasn't happy with. So the answer is that you probably never give up on a poem if you really believe in it just because other people are rejecting it. You're probably going to go back and revisit that poem and try a new approach or tweak it here or there and then send it out again. And I've had authors who send stories out 90 times before it was published. And so it's all because they just, when you get feedback, if you ever do, you really have to just consider, you don't want to write for that person. That never works out. You just want to see if what they're saying resonates with you. If it opens an idea in your head, then you can approach it maybe from a different angle based on their feedback. But I would suggest anybody never try and rewrite something to please an editor or to please a publisher. That's disaster. Just, take what they say, and if you can get a little grain of something out of that, then go back and approach it again. And sometimes it helps us to set it aside for a while and then come back to it.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
I think we will ask John his question too, because he has a pretty lengthy one.
Okay.
I've got you unmuted, and you look like you wanted to ask kind of several questions at once.
Oh, I was just curious. I didn't realize that you had published Major Reagan. I had that collection. I knew him. I'm originally from the Cleveland area, and I knew him from Kent. A great guy.
Love that guy.
Yeah, a terrific poet, terrific person, and sorry that he passed. I was just curious how you guys came across him.
Well, Pam Ushik and Wayne Pitt Root, our Silver Concho editors, were good friends of him. I didn't know Mage. And Pam called me it was a year before he passed and said, we've got this new and selected for Mage Reagan, and we'd like to fast track it. And they explained the situation. He wasn't the best of health. And so I said, send it to me. Let's get it done. And so I read the collection first, and was just moved by it. It was just amazing. And I felt like I'd met kind of a soul brother in him. And there was a reason for that too, which is interesting. He has a poem in there called "A Letter to My Son." And it starts out something like, May 19, 1963, Alton Memorial Hospital, you were born. And he goes on to talk about his life and about how he spent 20 years before that, in 1947, 48, in that same hospital battling polio.
Oh, right. I remember
And
that.
going through treatments and how painful it was and how it shaped him as an adult and as a poet. And it was just beautiful. And then I called Mage to talk to him about his collection. And I said, before we get started, let me just say to you, May 19, 1956, Alton Memorial Hospital, I was born.
No way.
Seriously. It was just we had, Mage and I, we never met, but we probably spoke on the phone once every other week at least, up until his death. In late April of 2018, I believe. But yeah, if you don't know Mage, his collection, Clouds Pile Up in the North, is brilliant. And they're all like these beautiful letters that he's written to people. I consider them like prose poems more than anything else. But what a guy. I mean, he started the Jawbone Poetry in Kent. That's been, and he died, I think, a week before the 30th anniversary of it.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Reading the week before that. He gave a reading the week before he died. And I tell you, the outpouring from his community up there was just amazing. I really felt, I still feel like it was a great loss that I didn't get a chance to meet him because we became so close just over the phone.
Yeah. Oh, he was a pretty extraordinary man. He was,
man,
and fun, and a guy you'd want to go to the racetrack with. He was.
Oh yeah, and he had stories about that too. You probably heard them. You know, but the Jawbone Poetry Festival started out as just a bunch of people getting together in a park, no plan, no agenda. Bring your chairs, bring some food, bring some wine, whatever you want to do, and we're going to read poetry to each other. And it just grew into this great big poetry festival that still had no schedule, no agenda of any kind. We're just going to get together for 2 or 3 days at this park and everyone read poetry. Yeah. It was beautiful.
It was when it didn't rain. It was.
So did you attend one of the Jawbones?
Yeah.
Did you attend one of the Jawbones, John?
Yes, I did. I have.
Oh, then you're lucky. Lucky guy.
I'm relatively new to the area. I'm in Wilmington area. I guess we just passed our 4th year down here, and I've read about the High Road Festival. Can you just talk about that a little bit? And is that open to poets from the outside? How are the selections made? Just that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it's. I'm hoping it will someday turn into an actual festival.
Oh.
We're starting out with it's an extension of the gathering of poets that we did for, like 7 or 8 years, where we just had master classes, and like a master class, it was more of a seminar, 75-minute seminars for poets where you could come and spend the day learning from some of the poets out there who were, making an impact. And I wanted to expand on that to include a short fiction element. There are no, there's only one other festival in the world that is exclusively for poetry and short fiction, and it's in Scotland, which I think is beautiful. I thought, there's nothing here just for poetry and short fiction, and I see poetry and short fiction as kind of like their cousins.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's some overlap, especially when you get into flash fiction and prose poetry. We did a collection by Mark Cox, who's in Wilmington. called Readiness. And I love this collection of prose poems, but he said, you know, I think some of that might be flash fiction. And I said, I don't care. It's great. Let's just, you know, put it out there. So, but anyway, the High Road Festival, we changed it up a bit. It's a la carte. You can come in and you can choose to do seminars and master classes in poetry or short fiction. The seminars are 75-minute long, and master classes can run 3 hours to, David Joss comes in and does his David Joss School of Fiction. He's considered one of the all-time best short fiction writers there are. So he does a day and a half on his, because we had 2 people last year took his 3-hour master class and said, if you have him back and do an all-day thing, I'll come back and do it. So David's amazing. So it is open to anybody and everybody. We've postponed it this year because of the coronavirus, and it'll be held, now we're shooting for June 13th here in Winston-Salem. Then we had people registered. We had someone coming from California, Texas, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Florida. So all around the country, and especially a lot of people locally because it was here. But we had to postpone it. It was supposed to be 2 weeks from now, but there's just no way we could do it with this virus thing going on. So, but they can go to the website, Press 53, and click on High Road Festival. And the main page is still up. It's got a notice there showing that registration's closed and that we've postponed it. But you can read through that to kind of get a feel for what it's all about. And it really is a wonderful day to come out and spend with your fellow poets and writers, get to know some people, have some great conversations. One thing we did this year that we haven't done in the past, we usually had 15 minutes between the seminars, and we've extended that to 30 minutes because we had so many people saying, can you give us more time to digest what we just got and also to catch up with people and talk. And we'll have a lounge there as well where people can go and relax with coffee, and we're going to have an open bar that starts at 3 for those who want to have a nice glass of wine or something. And we'll have vendors there, so all in the same area. So we had, I think, 16 or 18 vendors that were lined up to be there, and they'll be back in June. So it's a great way to meet other editors, publishers, writers, spend a day in a seminar setting, workshop setting to discuss writing and to make new friends, which is really what it's all about. We're blessed to have such a fantastic community of writers here in North Carolina. Other states are so envious of us for having that. And this is one of those occasions where we can bring together 100 to 150 people to spend a day just celebrating what they're doing. So we hope you'll join us.
Thank you so much.
That was wonderful.
That was amazing.
Thank you so
I
much.
just wanted to thank everybody for attending. I think that's all the questions we had.
Yes, I want to make sure that, most important thing, make sure they do the evaluations for us. That will be very, very helpful. There's a link in the chat. So please do that for us so that we can know what we did right and so we can keep doing it.
Yeah.
I'm so very happy that how this all turned out. Thanks for being so very generous with your time and with your answers to the questions. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure they got a lot out of it because, still a lot of people stood around, came back, and I'm just very happy, pleased.
Yeah. Well, if I'm sure we didn't get to all the questions, so if anybody has a question they would like me to answer, just send me an email.
Perfect.
Press53.com, Kevin@press53.com, and you can find it on the website too. And I'll be glad. It might take me a little bit to get back to you because we're cleaning up this whole thing with the festival, trying to deconstruct what we've constructed so we can construct it again later. And it's a lot of work, but I can get to that. And I promise I'll get back and answer any question you've got. Okay?
That's wonderful.
Thank you,
Sure,
Kevin.
glad to
It's
do
really
it.
nice to hear an overview, even though I've heard you speak before. It was nice to hear some angles that I didn't. I also told Celestine at some point we're going to have to ask you some Nashville stories, but we'll have to wait for that time.
Well, I still remember them.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Writing them down. All right, thanks everybody for attending. Let me unmute everybody because I know we want to take a chance to.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks a
much.
lot.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You had a room full, all right here.
Good. That's great. Anytime. I'm glad to do it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And I'll see you all at the next Poetry Society meeting when everybody's out of harm's way.
Right, May is what we're looking for. We're hoping for Awards Day, ceremony, because that's a big one. Sam Reagan Day, Awards Day for all our winners. It'll be in Princeton.
Fantastic.
Until then, guys.
See you then.
Oh,
All right. I'll take care of yourselves.
Bye,
All
Carol.
righty. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.